Hello and welcome. My name is Kenneth Anderson, and I will be going over just some project management basics. This is based upon the PMI, Project Management Institute methodology. PMI was started right around in the 1950s and created a methodology for good project management. Now, just to start off, some questions. Have you ever had a failed project? One that's been over budget, or there's a case study that I read about Chevron, and they had started a project, and they were building a new refinery for specialty chemicals, and the refinery, they built it on time and on budget, and it was doing what it was supposed to do. However, I thought when I first read the study, I'm like, yeah, well, they did what they were supposed to do, but they actually had a failed project because they ultimately, well, by the time the facility came online and was starting to produce specialty chemicals, the bottom dropped out on the market. Now, had they stepped back and said, well, what is the need, and done a feasibility study or done a market analysis to see where the market was at, they may have seen that this was a potential issue that could come up. So they ended up selling off the facility at a discounted price to somebody else. When it comes to project management, this should be a broader perspective and something more encompassing than just time, scope, quality, and cost, but you've got to hit your ultimate need. So some of the wisdom that I ascribe to is work smarter, not harder, slow is fast, and plan the work and work the plan. I also love this saying by Alfred Montepert, which says, "Do not confuse motion and progress. A rocking horse keeps moving but does not make any progress." I've been on projects where there's a lot of talk and a lot of action, but it's not clearly defined the pathway to complete the project. And so what often I see happening is there's a project and we've got to get going on this, and they skip the planning step, and what ends up happening is you get into the project and you may make mistakes or work on something that's not applicable later on in the project that has no value. And so project management helps to define what is it that needs to be accomplished, and then what are the steps that we need to get there, and helps to manage it to a successful end and have fewer failed projects. So to start off in our training, we're going to briefly go over this agenda with project selection and project charter and on down the list. And I'll talk about each of these. We'll probably spend the most time on the project charter. I think that I've become a big fan of project charters as time has gone on. So to start off with project selection, generally we believe, when selecting a project, there's a finite amount of resources. But also it's important to recognize that within those resources, do you spend much time thinking about where you want to spend that money? If you only select one project or only have one idea for a project, then that's your option. And even before you start the project, you could be working on a failed project because it has no potential for success. And so when it comes to project selection, taking time and thinking through, well, what are our options? 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different possibilities, and then figuring out or working through the details of the important factors of each of those, maybe doing a feasibility study on each of them, saying, okay, well, are the economics of this going to work out? Is this going to work for us? And then creating a selection criteria to base your decisions on and score some of those projects. Within business, you can use net present value, or you can create a scoring criteria, or there's multiple options that you can choose for project selection. Now on here we have thin air projects, and this is something that I've seen happen pretty regularly within different organizations. Is your boss comes to you one day and he's like, hey, I got this great idea. I want you to start working on it. And so you start working on it. And then you never hear another thing about it. And then maybe 4 months later, they come back and they're like, hey, have you got that project finished? And you're like, no. Uh, there wasn't a lot of time put behind thinking through the details. What is this supposed to do? How is this supposed to function? Or on the other side, your boss says do this, and you do what you think that they said you wanted them to do, and then you finish the project and you bring it and you present it to them, and they're like, no, this isn't what I wanted, and you wasted all of that time trying to make sure that you did what they asked you to do. Well, I call it a thin air project because, well, it came out of thin air, not well thought out, not planned out, just pulled out of thin air because maybe you needed something to do. Anyways, so when it comes to project selection, taking your time and creating a series of options to choose from, selecting the best options, and then using a selection criteria on those options, and then choosing the best to move forward. So this leads us to a project charter. I love this format. I've been using this for probably about 5 months or so. And to start off, it requires a project need. If you can't describe the project need within one sentence, you don't understand it well enough. The importance of the project need is that everything is going to come back to this one need, this issue that you're facing. And being able to describe it in one sentence means you clearly understand it. It doesn't need a paragraph. If you've got a paragraph, it's too long. You should have one sentence. Project description. The description gives you some background and context to the project need. This is very helpful, and just this may be 3 or 4 paragraphs. It may be a page. Depending upon the size of the project, it may change. Now, the business need or strategic reason for the project, I call this out specifically in this project charter, and I think that this is a critical factor because your project need and your business need, or the strategic reason for the project, may be 2 separate things, maybe 2 different things. But it's going to come back to, when you come to that planning stage, or if there's an issue and you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to do, it's going to come back to what is the project need and what is the business need or the strategic reason for the project. And then you'll be able to figure out where to go from there. Alright, so the goals portion is you start off, these are the 3 main things that you need to accomplish on this project. They should be clear, definable. You can use the SMART goals model, which is specific, measurable, achievable, realizable, and time sensitive. That's an effective way to clarify your goals for your project. Now, at this section, assumptions, constraints, and risks. Let's talk about constraints real quick, and then I'll talk about risks and assumptions. Constraints, these are the requirements. These may not be clearly understood, or they may be things that come up through the process, but defining out what the constraints are or the requirements of the project. Now, when I do a grant, going through the RFA, request for proposal, RFP, and being able to I outline what the requirements are of the grant, so that it's clearly understood in my mind what it is that they are looking for. It might be that they're looking for a multi-state, multi-institution, multidisciplinary approach to something. That needs to be well understood and documented as a constraint for the project. It might be relative that it has to work for a certain individual. Whatever the project outcome is, I've put that in there, that it has to work for my boss, or it has to be something that it might it just has to. These are requirements of the successful project, and putting these on the table early and understanding what these are going to help in the planning process. Now, assumptions and risks, these two I find that they they interplay fairly readily. Assumptions, of course, we know are things that we believe to be true about a project, and it's important to put these on the table so that so that you call those out. Now, risks, these are potential things that could take the project off track, or they could be good things. Risks can be good or bad. We generally just think of risks as bad things that could happen to a project. Now, with risks and assumptions, we can assume away risk, which is bad, by saying, well, I assume that this is going to happen, is setting yourself up to be blindsided or to have a failure because you're not looking at it as a risk. My first experience with this is my first class in project management that my team and we were analyzing a case study, and we had assumed that the translation or all of these other things would go well that were truly risks. We had assumed away our risks and had set ourselves up for failure. And so if there's an option between putting something into the assumption or the risk category, you've got to put it into the risk category. And if your risks you end up with 20 or 30, that's great, because you're looking for things, when it comes to risks, you're looking for things that could set the project back or take it off track or that could derail it, and by at least identifying them, then you can manage them. Now, I don't go through and generally I don't look at, well, what if there's a tornado that comes through? Well, what if there's a terrorist? What if there's a nuclear holocaust? All of those things. That's nice, but it's not realistic. So I try to spend my time on risks, on realistic things that could potentially happen. And then you can start saying, well, if this happens, here's how we're going to address it, and have a risk mitigation plan. There's also, from there, we look at approximate cost and the approach. Now, I often do these, I do the approach before I do the approximate cost. And part of the reason why is because, well, I don't know what I have to do until I've got it somewhat planned out. So the approach is, what are the steps, not in detail, but what are some of the milestones or the major parts and pieces that this is going to need to go through in planning out this project. So I'll develop an approach, and that'll give me a sense of how much time or kind of a cost associated with it. Now, it says approximate cost, and what I'm looking for generally in this category is what is the order of magnitude of that cost. Is it $100? Is it $1,000? Is it $10,000? $100,000? Or I'll use a range. It's between $5,000 and $8,000. Especially when working with clients, it's good to put in a range, because when scope creep happens and they want to throw in a few extra features, it's easy to say, you know what, based upon this, here's the bottom of the range. Now we're adding in these additional features or benefits. Here we need to ask for some extra money, so that the client also knows that this is a potential outcome. The stakeholder analysis, I generally do this right about the same time that I'm putting together the project charter. The charter will provide some context and frame for the